Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Nordic Day in 2026 here in the Nordic House in Reykjavik. Today's event is held in celebration of Nordic Day, which marks the signing of the Helsinki Treaty on March 23, 1962, the foundation of Nordic cooperation, often referred to as the Nordic Constitution. My name is Eyrún Magnúsdóttir. I am a journalist, an editor, and currently a part-time university teacher. This seminar is organized by the Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic Association, and we are very grateful for their leadership in bringing this important discussion together. It's a pleasure to see you all this morning. We have people from civil society, from media, politics, from from public institutions, and I think your presence, we can say it reflects something that is essential to democracy, participation, and dialogue. The theme of the Nordic Day this year is the future of democracy, a topic that is both urgent and evolving. Over the next hour and a half, we will explore how democratic resilience can be strengthened, how trust can be sustained, and how we can support the next generation in carrying democratic values forward. But first, we would like to show you a short video that sheds light on today's theme.
Demokrati. För mig är det möjligheten att påverka. Det är mitt val, min framtid. Men runt om i världen är demokratin under press. Här i Norden har vi byggt starka demokratier baserade på öppenhet och tillit. Det ger oss stabilitet även när kriser slår till. Men demokratin, den kommer inte av sig självt. Online möter vi skeva algoritmer, utländsk påverkan och extrema berättelser som utmanar vår tillit till institutioner och framförallt till varandra. Det har stor betydelse för oss alla, men vi unga, vi växer upp mitt i ett digitalt kaos. Och när tilliten sviktar, då sviktar demokratin. Det är inte alla i min generation som tror på demokratin längre. Men vilken framtid bygger vi? När tillit ersätts av misstro, när dialog blir till ekokammare och åsikter tar över fakta. Om vi unga ska tro på demokratin måste vi få riktiga chanser att delta, att påverka beslut och att bli hörda. Det är vårt gemensamma ansvar att hålla demokratin levande över hela Norden och över generationsgränser. Vi måste våga engagera oss i gemenskapen.
To begin our program here today, it's my pleasure to introduce the opening speaker. Dagbjört Hákonardóttir is a member of Parliament of Alþingi, and she is also chair of the Icelandic delegation to the Nordic Council. Welcome, Dagbjört.
Thank you, Eyrún, dear guests, friends, kära nordiska vänner. It's a true pleasure for me to be with you here today at the Nordic House and speak to you about something that we must never take for granted, which is democracy in our modern society. We know that the Nordic countries are often seen as stable societies and stable democracies, and I'd like to state that we are truly a front runner in that area. The Nordics are far from perfect, but we value, above all, common trust between us. As Alexander Stubb, the Finnish president, said in a very excellent speech in a session in the Nordic Council just over a year ago, trust is the Nordic gold. The stability that we take from trust rests on strong institutions and respect for the rule of law, and a high degree of public trust is something all countries must strive for. Because if trust isn't there, there rarely is a way forward. Well, it's safe to say that democratic resilience is understood broadly in the Nordic cooperation, and as the ability of our societies to function, adapt, and remain cohesive, even under pressure. We must never break. When I speak about security, it's not only security in the traditional sense, but also the strength of our democratic systems and public discourse. The will and ability to say what we need to say, even when it's hard. However, democratic development is under global pressure, as we know. A growing number of countries are experiencing democratic decline and rapid speed. Our strong allies are even weakened in the democratic landscape right before our eyes. And key indicators such as freedom of expression and the quality of public debate are also under pressure. At the same time, the polarization and disinformation are becoming more widespread, and we are only just grasping the impact of the hybrid means of attack and how systematically it's being used in our societies, and how significant these trends are. With each day, we find it harder to know who we can trust and when. Part of this development is, sadly, deliberate external influence. Across Europe, there is increasing recognition that foreign information manipulation and interference is being used to weaken the common understanding, to amplify divisions, and even influence directly and indirectly the democratic processes. These efforts are, sadly, often linked to broader geopolitical strategies, with Russia proving a clear example, where information operations accompany political and military objectives. We must also mention the ongoing international discussion about the role of freedom of expression in modern societies. Some voices, and very high voices, have framed open information environments as a source of vulnerability, even here in the Nordics and Europe. In the Nordic context, the perspective is almost non-existent and barely worth of our time to discuss that. We know that freedom of expression is not a weakness, it's our strength, and we must keep our voices high. It's directly attached to trust. It's the fundamental value of trust and to institutional accountability and to informed participation. The ties between those values cannot ever be separated. At the same time, the democratic societies are increasingly confronted with how to respond when openness is deliberately exploited and the debate is distorted and the processes that we take for given, such as free and open elections, are undermined. I hope that we can discuss this paradoxical plight here today. This requires careful judgment on our behalf. And this also is a key commitment to democratic principles. Nordic cooperation highlights that democratic resilience depends on strong institutions governed by the rule of law, inclusive societies with high levels of trust, something that we, the Nordics, must always share with the world, and the ability to withstand disruption. In Iceland, we know from experience how essential trust in institutions and open public debate are, particularly in times of crisis, when both are tested and must be actively upheld. This requires work on our behalf. Social cohesion strengthens democratic legitimacy, and democratic legitimacy strengthens resilience. Lower levels of inequality supports higher level of trust, and higher level of trust supports stronger democratic participation. Gatherings like this contribute to that process. They create a space for reflection and exchange, and strengthening the democratic culture that can never ever be taken for granted. To sum up, I would like to say that democracy remains one of our strongest assets, provided we have the confidence to protect its foundations and the clarity to recognize when they are being tested. I thank you very much for inviting me to speak today, and I look forward to discussions that will take place here today in the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Dagbjört, for those opening remarks. We now turn to our keynote speaker. We're very pleased to welcome Clement Kjersgaard. Kjersgaard is an anchor and editor with the Danish Broadcasting Corporation, Danmarks Radio, and publisher of Reason magazine. Through his work in journalism, broadcasting, and public debate, he has consistently examined the relationship between media, power, and democracy. He's recognized for his ability to ask difficult questions, challenge assumptions, and create space for informed and critical discussion. His work reflects a deep engagement with how democratic societies function and how they adapt under pressure. Today, he will address a fundamental question: is democracy on the way out? Please join me in welcoming Clement Kjersgaard.
Thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Yeah. All right, brilliant. I'm so pleased to be here. It's such an honor, it's such a privilege. I think it's absolutely necessary. When I was 16 years old, I was accepted into a high school in Hong Kong. So at the age of 16, in fact, on my 17th birthday, I arrived in Hong Kong. This is back in 1992. And so when we talk about young people, when we talk about the future that they are facing, the world that they are inheriting, I'm really brought back to that period in my life. I can see some of you remember that decade as well. And of course, we were looking into a very different future. One thing I'm struck by this morning, as I've been sat here listening to this brilliant presentation and thinking once again about these questions, is that the future might be very different, the challenges might be very different, but I feel absolutely convinced that the best way of addressing these issues is by having a debate across borders the way we are this morning. I really truly believe that we need this conversation. We need it in a Nordic context and indeed in an international context. Because everything we just saw in the video, of course, is true for democracies and young people around the world. These are truly global challenges. I don't know whether the answers are going to be global as well, but I can see that the dilemmas are the same, and I know we will all be wiser by listening to each other when we have this conversation up above and beyond, essentially, our national context. Now, I'll speak for about 15 minutes, and then I'll take your questions, and I'll make a priority of spending as much time as I do have on answering them. I'll just start out by reading 2 quotes from myself, because then I know they are of a certain standard. The first quote is this one. We will see a very tumultuous political debate in the years to come. Tumultuous. We've only seen the tip of it. Since 2001, there's appeared an obvious brutality in public discourse. If we base our democracy, this is the Danish one, but it could be anyone, right? If we base our democracy on the notion that deep down we are already in agreement, we've already twisted the rules of the game. Because what if we do not agree? And what if we are not going to agree? And then there's a second quote, and this is even better. Quote, Europe is in a historic crisis. The old party systems are, in country by country, threatened by dissolution. A long series of the elite's most treasured truths are under pressure. Wouldn't it be strange then if political discourse was the same as ever? wouldn't it be strange if this crisis made no sound? I said this to Berlingske, the Danish daily, back in February of 2016. It's 10 years old. I was right. I didn't know how right I was. Of course, I couldn't in any way, shape or form imagine the world that we are living in now. The amount of international pressure, the strange degree of confusion. At the moment, of course, I couldn't imagine that. But I did see at the time, and I think this comes from working in the media and essentially doing, as was just mentioned in the presentation of me, working in this area and along these front lines for as long as I have, I did see some of these weaknesses coming. And there's a point here, I think, which is to say, yes, we can talk about international sources of pressure. We can talk about what we would like people in Beijing or Moscow or Washington, D.C. to think, how we would like them to act, how we would like them to look at us and indeed the world. We can, create all kinds of arguments about how they should think differently and act differently. It's quite another matter to ask ourselves, what can we do? And I think when I phrase this question, and I make it the title of this presentation, is Democracy on the Way Out, evidently we could have asked the same question 10 years ago or 5 years ago, and it would have still appeared a little theoretical, right? It would have still been in the abstract. I don't think it's abstract anymore. I think this is acute. And I think the answer could very well be yes. I think there are numerous sources of this. Many of them are beyond our control. Some of them are within our control. And that is why really the key question is the one that is being asked here, right at the top of the agenda. How are young people going to look at this in 5 years' time and in 10 years' time? How do we ensure a degree of continuity, essentially, between the older generations, us who are old enough now to be able to remember a different world and to look on everything we have, not to keep it all, not sort of to encapsulate it against criticism or revision in any way, shape or form, but to engage in a debate and to try to ensure a degree of continuity. Now, one of the central tenets, and I think we talked a little about this when we speak about democracy, we can talk a lot about democratic values and principles and so forth. We need to talk about what is a mandate for change. And I think this is absolutely essential. Take the Danish general election. It's being, of course, held today without me. It's very strange and surreal, but true nevertheless. Now, the old way this works, right, in any elected democracy is that you have an election campaign. The politicians, they come out and they state their plans, right? So each politician, each party leader, of course, will come out and say, these are the issues. This is my solution. This is my plan. I have a policy. And then we go in as citizens and we vote for our policy, our plan, our vision, an ideology, whatever. At least we have that opportunity because the plans have been stated, right? We are not just voting for a political party, a certain, a color or shade, of the political spectrum. We aren't voting for an individual necessarily. We can choose to vote for a policy. Now that policy becomes ours. We have entrusted in that party our mandate, essentially. This is how politics works, or used to work, ideally. So that when you are a politician, a prime minister, a president, or whatever, and you carry out this plan, or you try to carry out this plan, right? Because it doesn't always succeed, of course. But when you try to bring it about and you try to realize it, you know that you have the population behind you. You know that whatever you want to suggest, whether this is on the issue of the economy, on the issue of climate, on the issue of war and peace, you know that you have the population behind you. Now, in a time of chaos and in a time of instability and in a time of discontinuity, such as the era in which we are living now, it would appear as if the plans, the policies are going out the window, right? And we are having election campaigns where some of the most important issues and some of the most important dilemmas aren't discussed because the world changes so fast and is so incomprehensible to the electorate, but to the politicians as well, that essentially the first part of this process goes out the window. And then, of course, the rest of it disappears. I believe this is what we are looking at. I believe this is what we are living through. I believe, going back to my 10-year-old quotes, I think this is what we've seen for the past 10 years. Where is the mandate? How can you act if you are running Iceland or Sweden or Norway or Denmark or Greenland? How can you act knowing that you have your community behind you if this process is somehow broken? And you can then sort of see a vicious cycle where the instability will increase, it'll grow, the chaos will grow, and essentially our way of responding to this is by saying, well, we can't talk about plans and policies. And essentially then I think we are sort of willingly but blindly entering an even deeper powerlessness than the one in which we were already placed. We've talked a lot about, over the last 10 years, the international system changing, the global order changing. All of that is true. And we can return to that in the discussion in just a couple of moments. But there is something new and novel about this, and this is our faith in democracy itself. So we can sort of make a list of all the issues, whether it's, you know, war and peace, the future of NATO, climate policy, whatever we want to talk about. We can make a list of all of these issues. And of course, if you are a young person today, a youth, you will realize that these are not new issues, and many of them are, you know, have been framed essentially and addressed in much the same manner for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. And you look at that and you will say, well, you know, why has nothing changed? What's going on? So we have sort of essentially the list of the old challenges that we can talk about and try to discuss. But then, of course, in addition to that list of problems, we have now, and this was the point that was already made in the opening, we have a crisis of faith in democracy itself. What if we are no longer convinced that the institutions that we have inherited can be used in addressing these issues? Then what happens? And that, of course, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. One dimension of this, of course, is the power of technology, right? A truly global issue, which also, I think, raises an even grander question. So when we talk about what President Trump is doing, when we talk about what Putin is doing, when we talk about what Xi is doing and so forth, the situation in the Middle East and so forth, we might be losing, I think, the even grander perspective, because for 250 years, which is only a short period in human history, we have believed in democracy, we believed in the individual. This is going back, of course, to the French Revolution, the American Revolution, but it's still a short time. And I think our doubts as to the power of democracy reflects a deeper doubt. For this entire period of human history, for the past 250 years, around 1800 until now, we have been able to believe that our freedom as individuals, you know, the rights with which we were endowed by the French Revolution and the American Declaration of Independence, so forth, really were closely tied up and closely linked with the fact that we became richer generation by generation, right? We were rich because we were free. You could even imagine that the freer we became, the more liberty we sort of established or realized, the richer we would become. Now, of course, what has happened in China over the past 50 years has changed this notion, or at least challenged the notion. Because what if we are witnessing now societal models, and this could be China, but it could also be the United States in a few years, depending on what happens in the US, where democracy is you know, challenged by the notion that you can establish a system that is truly non-democratic. But when it comes to economic development, highly successful. Then the link between freedom and wealth is broken, right? And essentially our 250-year history of enlightenment is challenged. I do think that's what we're looking into. I do think that is the true nature of this. I do think if we are trying to understand what Russia is doing, trying to understand what's going on in the United States, trying to understand what's going on in China, I think these are the questions to raise. I think fundamentally this is the key question for the next 25 years in world history, is to say, is that link broken? Are we going to see countries that are truly undemocratic, either by their nature or as a result of whatever is going on now? Are we going to see them being economically, financially, technologically, militarily incredibly successful? Because if the answer is yes, of course, democracy is truly challenged in a way that bears no comparison to the world that we have known for 80 years, right? I think that's where we are. I think those are the kind of questions we need to ask. Just to add to that, within our own democracies, we are facing a dilemma that is, has at least sort of two levels. One is, and this is maybe the easy one, and this is the one that we can see in virtually every election campaign, is that we have a population, an ordinary citizenry. This is a citizen, right, who is looking to a politician saying, I feel distant from you. I feel that you cannot understand my concerns, you don't understand me, you don't know the world in which I'm living, because you're not part of that world, right? You are living in another reality altogether. So there, we have this sort of sense of alienation between the citizen and the politician, the people and the elite and so forth, right? This is sort of the discourse that we've seen in the US, various places in Europe over the past 10 years. Now, something else is going on, I think, which feeds into this. Because if we become aware that our politicians, regardless of whether you're living in a country with 500,000 inhabitants or 5 or 10 million inhabitants, even country far larger than this, what if our leaders are powerless as well? What if the French president or the British prime minister or the German chancellor are only really spectators themselves? So we are spectators as citizens, but our politicians, our elite essentially, is also just watching, right? It's also just, a bunch of spectators looking to what is being done in Washington, Moscow, or Beijing, or indeed what private companies decide to do or not to do. And I think there is a sort of mirroring effect here. I think that the degree of alienation between us and the politicians sort of mirrors the degree of distance that we feel between the politicians and the global forces, whatever they may be. Because if we don't have any confidence that our politicians have power in the first place, why vote? Why engage, right? Why risk anything in terms of stepping out into politics as such? That, I think, is the acute dilemma that we're facing now. My fear, of course, is that young people, but indeed all of us in the years to come, will basically lean back into our couches and say, well, this is too difficult. The prices that are to be paid for speaking out and engaging in public discourse, or indeed going into politics, or going into the media, or going into activism, anything else, the price is very high, obviously. The level of conflict will be very high. And if we are not certain that we can affect any change anyway, why bother, right? So that's the key question. What to do then? And this is my final point. What is the good advice here for the media, for people in education, for diplomats, for politicians even? How should we go about it? What can we do better than at the moment? And I've made a list, not an exhaustive one, I think, not a comprehensive one, but just a little list of a couple of ideas. I think the key issue I've already indirectly addressed here. If you are a journalist, if you are an educator, if you are, as I said, a politician, an activist, whoever, working with civil society, whatever you may be, focus on the citizens. Do not focus on the politicians, right? Do not develop, too high expectations of the politicians. Don't essentially tell them what to do. I think they know what to do. They just can't handle it, right? So let's focus on the citizens. Let's focus on their concerns. Let's focus on their needs, rather, and create, in terms of the media, certainly, a different kind of public discourse where the politicians are welcome to take part, but they do not set the terms. Because if we focus on the politicians, if we focus on the world of parliament, and this is true of Denmark, Iceland, I can guarantee you, the UK that I know very well, certainly true of France and the US and so forth, we as media people, activists, the civil society, will essentially end up mirroring a political system that is somehow already broken. Do not, as an activist, as an expert, a professor, a journalist, a TV ranker, don't be distracted by your own challenges. When you have a media industry that is struggling to survive and gasping for air, when you have universities and institutions of higher education that are saying, where's our funding? What kind of pressures are we under? How are we being challenged by the politicians or the tech giants and so forth? It's very easy to be distracted by that and say, oh, we need to survive. Why? Even why? If the universities are not up to this challenge, if diplomacy isn't up to this challenge, if civil society isn't, if the media certainly isn't up to this challenge, why survive if we aren't sort of, contributing towards solving the job that we are there to do? Focus on content, not technology. I think this is absolutely crucial. Is technology important? Yes, as a means, of conveyance. But really that is it. Focus on the content. Include, don't exclude. Rather than making long lists of the people you don't want to talk to, the people you don't want to bring into the conversation. I think that's the wrong way to go. I think essentially that's why we ended up where we are now. Focus on quality, not quantity, which is a really excellent advice. Because we in the media and in civil society and so forth, we are competing against tech giants, and we are competing against, a machine essentially, literally almost a machine, creating content, creating debate. And we aren't going to win any contest on the quantity of what we can do. This is certainly true of nations the size of Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and so forth. We aren't going to win on quantity, right? We're going to win in a different manner. What does that demand? Well, it demands that we focus and we prioritize. I think this is where it becomes difficult, because I think the list I've just made seems pretty reasonable to just about anyone. Why is it difficult? Why is it harder than it looks? Because it makes us aware that the choices are ours, right? We can't just say, well, it's up to the citizenry, to the citizens. If the Iranians want democracy, they need to go into the streets. And if they don't, well, they didn't want it much anyway. So we're sort of, placing the blame on them, or placing the blame on presidents and prime ministers, right? So we need to face up to this as journalists, educators, diplomats, and so forth. We need to face our own agency. Thank you. That's the optimistic version, the lighthearted one.
Clement will now take questions. I think someone is supposed to be going around with a microphone, so he can take your questions. We have a question over here.
Hi, good morning. I'm Clarissa, the German ambassador here, and I'm not quite sure if I understood everything correctly what you said, but you leave me deeply irritated and worried. You are using a vocabulary that I know from very right-wing people, the elites. What did I note here? No mandate, alienation, and you have this division between the citizen and the politician.
Yes, a little closer to the mic, please.
Yes. Please. So what I mentioned is this kind of vocabulary that you are using that I know from very right-wing politicians in my country and others. So I'm worried about you kind of describing a society where citizens and politicians are divided by these two very strong strikes you did there. And you basically say, we have a problem. You don't really tell us what the solution might be. And I think the way you're talking is kind of dangerous.
Right.
That's all for now.
Great. Excellent question. Let's applaud that. I think that's a great question. And I think we have I think between us, I think we have just sort of described the last 20 years of world history. I truly believe that. That's not a joke. Excuse me?
We might have different interpretations.
Right, no, I said that between us, I think we've just summed it all up, in a sense. all I have described here essentially is reality, right? I've only described reality. What has happened in America over 20 years? What you have seen, of course, is a complete breakdown in trust in America, right? You can certainly argue that you've seen a breakdown in both political parties in the system of government. This is true whether you are voting for the current president or whether you voted against him. You are deeply concerned about the future of democracy in America, right? With all the implications this has for NATO, with all the implications this has for what we used to call the free world. What are you seeing in the UK? The largest party now, by a strong margin, is the Reform Party. This is a party that didn't exist 10 years ago. What is the strongest party, the largest party, according to opinion polls in Germany? The CDU, yes, in some opinion polls, right? And in others, over the past year, what is the other party?
We have a majority of center party.
Yes, but what is the other party that has been running?
This is not supposed to become a debate here, but between the two of us. But the thing is that you talk the talk of people who are against democracy. That's the impression I got, and I hope I'm wrong.
Right, but what is the biggest party in Germany? That's all. That's just the question I'm asking. Well, according to some opinion polls, and of course in April of last year, and this was just weeks after the German federal election, the largest party, according to opinion polls, was Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, right? It's true. I'm stating facts, right? Yeah, I'm stating a fact, man, right? What is the picture in France? Much the same. The reason I take you back 10 years, and I quote myself for 10 years ago, is I did see a crisis of democracy coming, right? I saw it 10 years ago. And what has led us here is what I described, which is a distance between whether you then call it the elite, or whether you call it the party system, or whether you call it the system of government. You can use any word you want. I'm not too concerned about the vocabulary, right? The people in power, right? So the parties that were there, it's true of the media industry as well, and so forth, right? We didn't quite make it. The old system didn't make it. If the old parties, right wing, left wing, green, red, whatever, if the old parties had, done their job 10 or 20 years ago, things would be very different now. But obviously they didn't. And then democracy, the way it works in Germany and France and the UK and elsewhere, of course, is that then new parties appear. New parties will appear to speak to people who are disenfranchised. Some will be on the right. Some, you saw this in, the south of Germany, the south of Europe 10, 15 years ago. Some will appear on the left. This is how democracy works, right? Final point, when you said I don't, talk about solutions, I think I really did. I have never met a stronger believer in democracy than myself. Never. I've spent my entire adult life in democracy and in the media, fighting for it, fighting for an open and fair and free debate, fighting for inclusion, and insisting on a certain, standard, a certain quality in our democratic debate. And truly that is being tested now. What is the challenge? The challenge, and this was my final point, the challenge is if we are going to see within the next 10 or 25 years, and I do believe this, I think we are going to see countries, it could be China, it could be other countries that will be highly economic successful, highly, setting the terms, framing the debate, with no individual liberty and with no democracy, then we have truly lost, right? Yes, next question.
Does anybody have a question? Yes?
Yes, hi. My name is Sigrun Alba, and I have the question about the climate crisis.
Sure.
Because, we know that the future will not be as we expected it to be, and of course that makes us insecure. So I want to ask you to reflect on the relation between climate crisis and the crisis democracy is in.
What was the first question, sorry?
Well, it's just the one question. The relation between climate crisis
Yes.
and the crisis that we are facing in terms of democracy, and also maybe in relation to the denial of climate crisis as we see in the US government, for example.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think an excellent question. And I think there is once again, you see, themes running in parallel. I mean, the former question was essentially, about, the right wing, right? What is happening on the right? The right-wing parties in Europe or the US, the voters there being concerned with issues that they feel were unaddressed by the old parties, right? So new parties are established to address that issue. And in terms of the climate issue, you have much the same mechanism, right? If you 10 or 20 years ago were deeply concerned about the climate issue, and you thought to yourself, I want this to be addressed, you have seen, and this is true, of Europe, it was true of the US until recently as well, you have seen mainstream parties and mainstream politicians making this an issue. President Biden did it, right? He did the Inflation Reduction Act. He made a huge priority of the climate issue, right? And this is only, 4 or 5 years ago. It would appear as if this was a major priority of the European Union and for the United States. Now, for many of those voters for whom the climate issue is absolutely crucial, and this is true of both the US and Europe, it was never enough, right? The changes that were being made just weren't enough. Has the world, has the industrial world, has Europe, has the US truly changed course at the speed which is necessary if you listen to science? The brief answer, of course, is no, right? So you end up, and this is what I'm talking about, this is the feeling of powerlessness, that you could have voted for green parties or, politicians speaking a green language for 20 or 30 years, still looking at the results and saying, I don't think the results are good enough. We just aren't there, right? We don't see it being realized. Does that make you personally begin to lose faith in democracy, does it? You still believe in democracy? Right. Despite the fact that they believe, yes. So you believe in it, you hope on it, but you don't count on it. Would that be true? Yes. Well, you see, and this is what I'm describing. And so once you have people on the right, once you have people on, concerned with migration, once you have people concerned with climate, once you have people concerned with it could be economic inequality, which of course is a huge issue everywhere, whether it's framed or not, you begin to see parts of the electorate losing confidence in democracy. Not on the left or on the right, but in a far wider and more fundamental sense. This is the challenge, right? Because once you start to say, I don't believe in democratic institutions anymore. I don't think that democratic institutions can truly change, can bring about the change I want in terms of climate. Then what do you do? Do you lose faith in democratic debate, in your own role in society, and so forth? And so this is the challenge. This is truly the challenge. This is the new issue. The climate issue isn't new. Biodiversity isn't new. We've looked at it, this is my earlier point. We've seen it framed in this manner, for half a century, but it hasn't been addressed. And so this is why the crisis of democracy is acute. And this is why we have such a challenge now. And I truly say this is not, I'm not trying to exaggerate this for effect. I think within the next 5 or 10 years, we have a challenge. People in your generation and mine have a challenge in terms of saying, will the next generation believe in democracy? Will they recognize democracy when they see it? To bring this about, right? And we have to face this head on, because what used to be the climate issue is becoming a democracy issue. Next question.
We have time for one question, and then we go to our panel.
Hi, my name is Gunnar.
Yep.
Thank you for your speech. I'm a teacher.
Yes.
I teach young people in high school.
Yeah.
I teach them politics, sociology, criminology, mass media, stuff like that. I am just wondering about the role of educational systems in this matter. I myself, I'm a little bit worried about my educational system, that in that way that I think we are not responding in the right way to this crisis. Could you reflect on that a little bit, you know, the role of education, possibilities and stuff like that?
Yes, and we're almost out of time, so I'll give you a brief answer, but I'm here when we finish, if we could continue the conversation once you know, the panel is done. Those recommendations that I sort of, you know, gave at the end of the presentation, they were meant, you know, as I said, both for the media and for the education system. I speak at educational institutions in Denmark weekly, sometimes daily. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is an obvious crisis of education. I think it was there. You know, it's been there for a long time. I think it has accelerated with artificial intelligence within the last 3 or 4 years. I'm deeply concerned, deeply. What I see in Denmark, what I see in the UK and elsewhere is I see artificial intelligence not being rolled out by anyone, it's rolling itself out. It's already there. I know people in Danish high school, secondary education, universities, all they are essentially getting from their students now are, you know, papers written by AI. What will happen here, and this is not to be too dramatic about it, but what will happen in just within the span of, we're not talking about, you know, the span of a generation, we're talking about a span of 5 or 10 years, is that you will have people who come out who on paper are better educated than anyone ever has been before. In reality, they are not. Because if you are letting AI, I'm sorry, answer the questions, you aren't doing the work as a student. So, and I'm not saying that everything was just great 5 years ago, but I think this is a new challenge that is being added to anything else. If we are teaching young generations that AI has the answer, that science and the scientific method, whether you are, you know, a climate scientist, whether you're researching, you know, within biology or, you know, political science, whatever, if we are teaching now generations of young people, and these are the people who do get an education, right? If we are teaching them that AI has the answer, you know, we have contributed essentially to the closing down of 250 years of enlightenment. I truly mean this. I'm not exaggerating. Because what we have been doing for the past 250 years is not about, you know, gathering information or collecting information or knowing facts or finding facts. That is really not what this is about. What enlightenment is about and what education is about is furthering an environment, an arena in which to ask questions and to debate questions openly and freely in confidence that people will listen to you and you won't be punished for what you say, right? I think at the moment, and this is accelerated by AI, we are turning the education system into something very, very different. I don't think this is a debate that can wait for 10 years or 20 years. I think it's a debate that needs to be had now. So I share your concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. We now move on to the panel discussion, where we explore these issues from a range of perspectives. I'm very pleased to introduce our panel, Ragnheiður Geirsdóttir, President of the National Youth Council of Iceland. You can just please come up here and take a seat. Dagbjört Hákonardóttir, member of Alþingi and chair of the Icelandic delegation to the Nordic Council. Maximilian Konrad, professor of political science at the University of Iceland. Skúli Bragi Geirdal, head of the Icelandic Safer Internet Center. Ingunn Lára Kristjánsdóttir, social media journalist at RÚV. And welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining this discussion. I'm going to move over here. I hope my mic works. Yes. Let me start with a broad question for all of you, really. So we can start somewhere. And then I'm sure the people here have some questions for you as well. Do you believe in democracy in the Nordic countries is actually weakening, or are we primarily experiencing a period of transformation? Skúli, would you like to start?
Wow, big question to start with. Do I believe in it? Yes. every time we talk to students at my work, every time we talk to adults or just anyone, if we are always talking in a negative manner and we have no faith in our institutions, I think we are contributing to the problem we are facing. So I think that we need to have faith in all of this. What we are seeing is, because in our line of work we are constantly doing reports, we are doing research, we're trying to figure out what is the public opinion in all of this, in trust, in democracy. And I would say that I believe that we were being naive. But what we're seeing now in our newest report is that it's changing. This is becoming something that is important to us. We need someone to put emphasis on it. We want someone to put more focus on this in education, raising awareness. So I think that there's a hope amongst the public as well. But it's our job to try to answer it.
Dagbjört, same question.
Democracy is being tested. It's being threatened, yes, and it's actively being tested all over the world, and the Nordics are, the same applies for the Nordic area. However, I think that our strength in this field is that we must be able to, and we have been proven to be able to speak freely and openly about these plights and the risks that we look upon. And in that regard, we must be able to share our concerns freely and speak of difficult things and, yes, describe the situation as it is. I think that there have been some excellent points pointed out here that people are not experiencing trust towards politicians and institutions. And I think that the Nordic region must not take trust for granted, as I said here before, and this sounds kind of like a blah, 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 but it cannot be expressed too strongly. Also, we politicians must not neither take trust from the general public for granted. And this is something that my party is, the Social Democrats, are very much aware of. And there are some projects and elections coming up here in Iceland that will test the strength of this trust, both in municipal elections and also when it comes to the national referendum of the possible membership of Iceland in the European Union, which is going to prove to be very interesting, which will and not to become I'm not going to color this debate by that, but that will evolve around trust either to the European Union or Iceland as whether we want to put more trust on just the European Economic Area. This is very up in the air to most people, and people have a very strong deal with, connecting with those democratic institutions. And this is a project and a lesson for us politicians.
Ragnheiður, you represent the National Youth Council. Mm-hmm. Do you think that young people in general feel that the democracy is weakening, or if it's some sort of a period of transformation?
I think it's a period of transformation. Because I think that what is changing is maybe our view of democracy, and I think our behavior towards it. Young people today, they don't behave like they used to. For an example, like party allegiance. I think that the way that we behave when it comes to democracy is changing, and I think that that's what we have to. That's what's transforming, is that we have to make sure that. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. Yeah, I think that this is a period of transformation, especially concerning party allegiance. but I don't think that the interest is decreasing. I think that it's, the real threat is that maybe we don't see the point in voting. We see it maybe, we don't see it as much as of a duty as people used to see it. So I think that that's mainly what is changing, is that, yeah, that we maybe don't see it as much of a duty, more of a right, and that the behavior changes in a way that maybe it's, we need a, yeah. I think I've put my point
I think I understand
forward.
what
Yeah.
you're saying. You're saying politicians need to work harder because it's not automatical that young people will go out and vote. But they're still interested. But maybe
the interest is just different. It's not in the political parties or the politicians themselves. I think maybe that's something that we are losing faith in that. I think that that's not good, but I don't think that the interest in politics is decreasing. It's more of where the interest lies. Because I think we're open to trust. We're open to trusting institutions, and we're open to democracy. But I think it's just what is changing is that it's not the political parties, maybe the institution. I don't know. That's the question that I'm pointing out.
it's a good point that trust needs to be earned. Max, from the view of a professor of political science.
Well, let me start by thanking everyone for putting this together and for the excellent keynote speech, which I thought was really thought-provoking. There's also a couple of comments that I think we're going to have on that. I mean, a political scientist would usually start by picking apart the concepts and asking, what do we actually mean by democracy? What do we mean by transformation? I think it's an interesting question, but I don't think the two options that you gave us are mutually exclusive. So I think most of us would probably say that, yes, this is a transformation, but then it's a different question to what extent this weakens democracy. And I think in answering that question, I think we need to maybe start with the overall picture and then focus or kind of zoom in more on the Nordic countries. I think overall, yes, this is a transformation. I think we need to discuss this in relation to what I would consider to be foundations of democracy, which we can talk a little bit about. So I do think that there are patterns that are observable across countries that should give us reason for concern. I'm absolutely sure that Skúli is also going to talk about that in a little while. But I mean, if we think about democratic values, if you think about from more a political theory perspective, that democracy is not just a set of rights, but is also a set of obligations, duties, virtues in a sense. I think in those areas we do see quite profound transformations which have the potential to weaken democracy. In our project, I've also always argued that this is more than a challenge. It is an existential threat to democracy. So I think we need to take all these things from that perspective. I think the concept of trust has been mentioned many times. I think that's really key here. In various respects, I mean, trust in institutions, trust in kind of purveyors of knowledge, trust in other people, trust in information also, especially trust in quality journalism. Maybe to pick up on that last point, so I think overall we are seeing that media consumption patterns are changing, so people are getting less information from, I don't want to say trustworthy sources of information, but that's what they are, and they go to other sources of information where they absolutely don't even know how the information is coming to them, and I think that is a profound transformation. Now to zoom in more on the Nordic countries, I mean, Nordic countries are high trust societies in various respects. I mean, that is both related to trust in journalism, trust in institutions, trust in democratic processes, but we also see that patterns are changing here. For instance, in terms of media consumption, yes, people have more faith in public service broadcasters here than in a lot of other places in Europe, but there is also a coming critique and a coming kind of undermining of the credibility of journalism, which is also driven by populism.
In Gunlara, same question. Do you feel that democracy is actually weakening, or is this a period?
Well, it's a big change. That whole what you said about not this belief in a party, that it sounds that we're going more towards individualism. I am a journalist. I'm a third generation journalist. My grandfather and grandmother used typewriters to write for party papers. In Iceland we had tons of papers for each party members, and that was the, that's how journalism was. It was party politics, and everyone had their own version of an event or a story. My father told me how the internet changed the way of journalism. Unlike my grandfather, where they had to go to the location and see it happen and confirm it, they could get a phone call or they could get an email telling them this happened, I was there. Then people got smartphones, everyone could take a picture, send it to us, and we had confirmation of a story. Now we have to do what my grandfather did because of AI, that we get photos and videos that we cannot confirm are real. Now we have to go back to the old way of doing things. We need to go there and we need to confirm. So I have a more belief that maybe we are in a cyclical nature rather than going towards one doom. But I still think that we have never gone back on technological advancement. So maybe we will just continue until something breaks and something that is good, maybe a strong foundation that has lived through some time. Maybe we start building from there again. But yeah, I think we are back to individualism because of technology, because of social media, because we are in our little echo chambers and we have our own truths. And we don't believe in the power of big media with editors and public broadcasters, because they're not telling the story that we are seeing. They're not telling our story. And when you have millions of individuals that have their own version of a story and they say, you're not telling our story, it's very difficult to keep trust in these times.
That's a good point. Thank you so much, everyone. Now I would like to focus on the people here and see if we have some questions from the room. Yeah?
Hi, my name is Andris. I'm from Barnaheill, Save the Children, Iceland. One of the things that makes the Nordics nice is that we have a very strong civil society that takes care of a lot of, or it sort of nurtures a lot of our democratic institutions. And we've been seeing a negative development in our countries, like in the rest of the world, when it comes to support and funding for these institutions in the past few years. We saw a very negative turn in Norway and Sweden in the past years, and those countries have focused on supporting NGOs that are advocating for peaceful solutions in a time when we really need those. I mean, we're seeing news reports in Iceland regularly about foundational NGOs crying for help because the authorities are lagging behind when it comes to giving them straight answers on funding. And we're seeing, so this is what we have in the national context. In the international context, the Nordics have also been using aid to help developing countries become more democratic, which should ensure the future of democracy globally in the long term. But those have been seeing severe cuts when funds have been shifting towards traditional defense. So the question is basically, I mean, this saying we have in Icelandic, this perfect saying, that it's a short-term solution to piss in your shoe. Is that what we're seeing right now?
Yes, thank you. I'm Stefan Marquardt, an independent legal consultant, spending my time between Reykjavik and Brussels. I don't think anyone here in this room questions the value of democracy itself, and this is based on individual freedom, freedom of expression, fundamental rights, etc. But I would like to raise the question about the actual, and that hasn't come up in the discussion so far, in order to, indeed, and democracy is under threat for various reasons, but should then the countries that where the majority of the population still believes in democracy, not perhaps take a critical look at actually, how elections work and the electoral systems, because there you see huge differences among European states, but also if I look at the United States, for example, part of the issues we see there, in my view, is linked to the fact that they have an electoral system that goes back a long time, where one can question whether it's actually democratic. I mean, if you see that a president of the United States a very powerful position, can be elected without having a popular majority, I think there's an issue here. And let's not forget, and that's a paradox, I think, of our democracies, that in fact, well, in the end, a majority of a population can choose to elect an autocratic government. I mean, we've seen that in Poland, we've seen that, we still see that in Hungary. Let's not forget that even back in Germany, I'm a German citizen, back in history, the Nazis were actually democratically elected. So there's an issue about democratic systems and electoral systems, and paradoxically, for example, in Belgium, where I spent part of my time, we see the phenomenon that there are so many fragmented political parties that they actually, because, again, of the electoral system allowing many parties to come up, and they're obliged to form coalition governments with sometimes 6, 7, 8 parties, and they don't seem to, no, just a comment and maybe to elicit some comments and reactions, and they don't seem to agree on anything. Like just one concrete example, in Brussels, as the region of Brussels, they were not able to form a government for more than 600 days. Which is a problem, and that's linked to the electoral system and the electoral methods they have. Thank you.
Okay. So Andres had a question about NGOs and their funding, and maybe since we have Dagbjört here, she should take that question.
An excellent point to make here today. Yes, NGOs play a key factor in modern society and in a democratic society. However, I must state out the fact that just to keep domestic politics out of it, and I do think that Iceland has the eye on the ball when it comes to the role of NGOs on a global scale. We see that technological oligarchs are putting all their power in diminishing the voices of women for peace and for social cohesion. When we look to the United Nations, and we can all discuss how that has been played out throughout the years. Now when we see a declaration when it involves gender or something that we should all try to find a common solution of. We see that more nations, with the United States, in the forefront, are playing a veto. This is a direct effect of the oligarchs, and anti-democratic powers are influencing our global discussion when it comes to core beliefs. One thing that I think that is also worth mentioning is that only under 10% of the world's populations lives within a stable democracy. Almost half of the world lives in a flawed democracy. The rest lives with something quite completely different. I think that we take the politicians to answer you. I am a very avid supporter of Nordic cooperation when it comes to women's rights and the importance of us working closely together and supporting NGOs in that sense. I do think that this is something that is beyond fighting sometimes, but we must never let the faith diminish.
Thank you. Skúli.
I would say that we've been talking about misinformation, polarization, democracy, and I think that we really need to look at what is the answer here. And oftentimes we throw out that we need to be more media literate and we need to protect trust, we need to protect democracy. But what does it mean and how are we going to do it? And it's not only a problem of NGOs, it's a problem of we see it all over Europe and the Nordics that the initiatives we are taking, the awareness campaigns and educational programs, they lack the funding and resources to truly reach their potential. It's often we just, here you have this 1 million and you're going to protect democracy. Great. How to do it? So at the same time, we need to put focus on the public. How do we empower them? But when it comes to all of these polarization, misinformation, how do we do it truly? Because at the same time, we need to put emphasis on the public. We see that the public overestimates their own ability to spot fake news, to be AI literate. And how do I engage in education or a discussion with someone that doesn't think they need to improve anything at all? Of course, we need to put our resources towards the content. I would agree with that. But at the same time, I want to influence algorithms in the financial system. At the same time, I also want to influence algorithms, these filter bubbles, these echo chambers, this dissemination of the public, because what we're seeing in our newest report is that it's not only polarization from left to right, it's also between women and men and age groups. So we see a polarization in all kinds of different, in all kinds of different spaces. So yeah, my point really is that we tend to talk about improving these things, protecting trust, and we are now going into the referendum without taking this necessary step to protect the security of elections, even though we've been pointing it out. And when it comes to foreign information influence, it's not only going to be Russian or Chinese, it could very well come from Norway. And then we can look to our neighbors in Sweden, where they have the psychological defense. It's not only about cyber attacks on infrastructure, it's also how do we protect people and the influence other foreign actors are trying to have on the public.
Thank you. Anyone else that wants to chip in with this, or should we take the next question? We can take one more question, at least, maybe two, from the audience. Is there anyone with a question? Come on. No one?
If not, just to emphasize, and I completely agree with Skúli here, one thing that we maybe didn't speak enough on is data sovereignty, which I think is a very crucial thing to discuss. Clemens came into the point when he talked about content, not data, but I do think that data is a key factor here. Where is our cloud? Just remember that the cloud is just someone else's computer. And where is that computer? Where do you keep your discussions with your ChatGPT, where you might be relying on the shoulders of someone who can advise you in your problems? We must acknowledge that Europe needs to be more self-sufficient in that matter.
Good point.
Since we're slowly moving in that direction, I mean, I really like the keynote speech. There's lots to discuss here. The only point where I really was like, interesting, I've never heard anybody say that, is the point about let's focus on content, not technology. I think that's a point that I would love to discuss more, because isn't it the case that it's technology that has gotten us to this point? I mean, isn't it you know, I mean, starting with social media as vehicles for disinformation to kind of algorithmic filtering of content to the emergence of echo chambers and all these things. I mean, we've heard plenty of references here to, I mean, the power of the big tech oligarchs in not just shaping what is said, but shaping even ideas about free speech. I think that's the next frontier, actually. So, I mean, to hear somebody say, let's focus on content rather than technology. I mean, apart from the fact that, I mean, content is so limitless that it's going to be difficult to tackle that anyways, but why is that better than focusing on the technologies themselves?
Do you want to respond?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent
Just
point.
very short.
And I think I was thinking about it when Ingun was, when you were saying your description essentially earlier, where you said you're a third-generation journalist, and you sort of described to us the technological transformation. And I think this speaks to also the question that you had, sir, about education towards the very end. I think that many of these concerns that we are having, and many of the excellent points that have been raised, are points that were pertinent and important also 10 or 20 years ago. I do think, and I think both of your points speak to this, that in terms of technology, and your point as well, right, who owns it, right, who owns the cloud, who sets the terms? Of course this is key, right? Of course this is where the battle is being waged at the moment. In the European Union, of course, this is, you know, top of mind. It's been a French agenda for years, and if you ask anyone in Brussels, they will say, you know, these things are now intertwined. We can't talk about Greenland. We can't talk about the Middle East. We can't talk about Gaza, Iran, and we can't talk about any of it without essentially talking about who owns the technology, thereby who controls the technology. And essentially the question then becomes, can a free democracy exist in a society that doesn't control its own digital infrastructure? The answer to that question is very likely no, right? I mean, very, very likely. The point I was making, I think the point I'm making when I said we should focus on content rather than technology. I've been in the media business now, in a way I've been there for 40 years, but as an adult I've been there for something like 20 years. And I've sort of seen many of my colleagues over the last 20 years say, oh, we need to work with social media. What does Facebook want? You know, they want this kind of content. We will create this kind of content for Facebook. Why? Because we need to be on Facebook. We need to be on TikTok. What do they want? Oh, they want a video. Do they want it vertical? Do they want it horizontal? Okay, they want it vertical. Well, we'll do vertical videos. How long should they be? A minute? No, that's too long. That's far. We'll do a 30-second. And you've seen it, I mean, just in the Danish election campaign this time around. Are we then running the show? Or are you essentially seeing old, state-funded, respectable legacy media, as they say in the US, essentially playing along with whatever, you know, the platform is demanding of us? And I think that I'm terribly concerned about AI. Not just losing out to it and losing my job to it, I wouldn't like that, but I'm also concerned with how it makes us all think, right? I mean, you've been a content, you know, creator in various different forms, right? What we are meeting now and what we are facing up to is essentially to say then, you know, how do we put ourselves back in the equation? And when I say I think we should prioritize content over technology is, I think if you know why you are there, if you know the story that you are going to tell, if you know the point you are going to make, then, you know, creating the technological narrative around it or choosing the format for it should be secondary to why. Why are you there? Why are you making yourself part of the conversation? I think that is the point I'm making, but that is sort of a more limited point, speaking to the media and to educators, rather than speaking in terms of a societal issue, because then I agree totally with the three of you that control of technology, ownership essentially is key.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I feel like this is like, do you know that film Inception? You know, when he goes to a dream and he plants an idea. I think that's like how we need to think of media.
That's what I hear you saying.
The idea needs to be strong for it to filter out into the outer layers of the dreams until he wakes up. Yes. Which is like, if you think of like the forum, is it television, radio, or social media? But I think it's the same with like, what kind of forum are we trying to like protect democracy? If the idea is strong enough, if the content is strong enough, then the way you package it is secondary.
Can I just ask, what is your experience? Do you feel but are you using social media in Iceland in a way that empowers young people, that makes them part of the political discourse?
She is.
Yeah. No. Yeah, not you personally. I mean,
Yeah.
Iceland as such, right?
So
Yeah.
I started in newspapers, and I saw that our readers were very old, and I thought, well, the paper's going to die out, and the paper has not died out. It went bankrupt, and it's no longer published. And I went into social media because I saw that young people were not getting good, strong information. They were there on the platforms whether we liked it or not. And I said, we need to be there to be able to give them a good place of like trust and information. And we slowly started building it up. And the moment that I felt really proud of it was when people were tagging us in videos online, being like, hey, Rúfréttir, is this correct? Like, is this real? And I could go and look at it and be like, yes, this is real, but this is a 4-year-old news, and this is not correct, but this is correct.
Right.
So, and that's what I really appreciated about it. But, you know, and I did make many mistakes like that, you know, following the trends, be like, we need to be trendy. And I also think about it, be like, I want to have fun as well. But because I work in a really good, like, editorial environment where we think about the story. The story is the center, and then it's second nature where we put it out, like how we put it out.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Let's focus a bit on the future of democracy, which is what we're here to discuss. And as a closing question, sort of, I would like to end this on a sort of a forward-looking note and ask you all to answer what is, if you could take one concrete step that would strengthen democracy, let's say over the next 5 years or so, what would that be? Like, what needs to happen so we can strengthen? We all know the problems. We've been discussing the problems here. But what steps need to be taken for it to become stronger? Would you like to start, Ragnar?
Yeah. I think that for me and for young people, I think that we as a group need to have a stronger mandate. And I think that what we feel a lot of the time is that there is no space for our voice. And when I mean space, I don't mean maybe in the media. I mean more of when it comes to having representation in the government or just wherever. I think that that's the place to start for us, is to essentially create some sort of space within that we have a strong platform that is respected and guarded by law in a sense, so that it's kind of that we have, I'm going to say this in Icelandic, fast pláss. So I think that is where we should start. For an example, have a formally recognized Icelandic Youth Council. I think that would be a great place to start. Yeah, so that's where I would start for young people, essentially, is that they can see that they're being represented, that there's not just always someone who's, like you talked about, with kind of, you can't see yourself with a politician because you feel like they're so far away. And yeah, so that's the place that I would start.
You need to be heard and you need a platform.
Yeah,
a
definitely.
Okay, thank you. Skúli.
Yes, to give a one answer is quite difficult. Oftentimes, I would say just improve media literacy, but it's a simple solution, and like I said, we lack the resources. But if I try to give some kind of an answer to this question, what we're seeing now is this great competition for our attention span. And I have to involve myself in this competition in my awareness campaigns in media literacy, Ingun as well in the media, Dagbjört in the politics. And what is really difficult is that when we are competing for this attention, who are we really talking to? Am I just talking into my own bubbles and echo chambers, people that already agree with me? So what we need to do is try to, close the gap, try to put people more together. We need to have some kind of a common way common way for information sharing and discussion, and the media is of course plays a key role in all of this, and also politics. How do we do it? Is a kind of a difficult question, but what we really need to do. I'm getting all over in my answer.
Media literacy is a good
media
place
literacy,
to start.
yes, but also this, if we avoid having a discussion, an open discussion with the youth, we see this every day. We avoid some discussion because they are in some kind, they're difficult or heated. I will always find someone to answer me online. I want to be the person to answer these questions, or the media, or someone trusted. We can never just put out the information, trust nothing. Trust nothing is a terrible thing to tell young people. Mm-hmm. If I don't trust anything, what to do? I feel lost. We need to tell them where can we find trust and how to search for trusted information.
The social democrat in me says social cohesion, number one, Nordic and European leadership in AI, but the Icelander in me says, and I hope you all agree with me, is free press. And in Iceland, it truly means just press. We need to secure that our free and open domestic journalism continues to thrive. And in this competitive landscape we are seeing globally, that is going to be our project, and I do know that we don't have all the solution in place right now, but for me, that is key. I also like the fact that, and I must state it, that we must bring the people that we need to want to suppress in the common discussion down. But if we bring them to the general press, then they have maybe less time to wreak havoc on social media. So I'm gonna think about it. But that's maybe for the others to take. Yeah.
Any words of wisdom?
I would say everything that was said so far, and I would summarize it under the heading of reclaim the public sphere as a space of free and open communication, and that entails citizenship education in the sense of media literacy, digital literacy, algorithmic literacy, getting people to understand how social media work. It also means re-emphasizing virtues like respect, mutual respect, respect for opposing worldviews, breaking out of echo chambers, learning again to, I mean, everybody in this room seems to have the same opinion, at least I haven't heard anything else. Learn to appreciate again how important it is to argue with people that have a completely different perspective than you, and do that in a civil way. I think that's something that's obviously getting lost. And a lot of this boils down to breaking the power of the big tech companies.
Thank you. Ingunn Lára, you get to have the last word.
But maybe it's just like, maybe I'll put it out in like a challenge to everyone here, like to get out of your bubble. One great thing about working, I'm guessing, in politics and in media is that you always talk about people with different opinions and different views. And it's really healthy and it's really good. And it just gives you, I think it grows your empathy. And I think empathy is just a wonderful thing to have. And it's good to understand people, not like, you don't have to agree with them, but I think it's really good to understand people.
So more empathy, free press, media literacy, platform for young people. We have a lot of solutions here. And with that, we conclude Nordic Day in 2026. Thank you all for being here, and thank you so much, and thank you to our keynote speaker. Thank you, and goodbye.